Morning, everybody. Happy it's another crash course in the British Constitution Day, and welcome to the news agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's royal editor, Russell Myers, who we are very lucky to have because he's pretty busy at the moment and living out of hotels. Morning, Russell.
Good morning.
Now, this is the People's Pay-Per-View, so get into the comments, ask us your questions. We'll do our best to answer them for you. Those of you listening later on podcast will just have to join the queue in Westminster Hall instead. So, what have we got today? Well, unsurprisingly, the Mirror has splashed on what is only day 4 of the Queen's death, with a picture of her coffin draped in the Royal Standard of Scotland as it's carried into the Palace of Holyrood House in Edinburgh yesterday. Now, it came after a long procession down from the Highlands, which saw some extraordinary scenes, thousands of well wishes at some points, 1 or 2 individuals at others, and a guard of honour by some tractors as well, which must be a first. Now, today, King Charles III is going to address both Houses of Parliament before going to Scotland, where all the Queen's children will walk with her coffin to St Giles Cathedral, where members of the public will be able to pay their respects. And then Charles embarks on Operation Spring Tide, a tour of the home nations. Now, we'll get into the detail of that a bit later on, Russell. But first, I want you to take us to your story on pages 8 and 9, where those extraordinary scenes of the warring princes William and Harry and their wives at Windsor at the weekend, they're pictured there. But you say that these public signs of reconciliation, which everyone was so happy to see, they aren't likely to outlast the funeral. So what have you heard?
Well, precisely. I think that this truce is certainly temporary, and my understanding was that the new Prince of Wales, Prince William, sort of extended this olive branch to his brother as a though of unity for the family. I think that he did realise that there are bigger things at play here. Certainly, the Queen's death has brought the family together, and we've seen a lot of them rushing up to Balmoral to be with her side when she was in her final hours, or just be with each other to try and soak in the moment and try and understand it, I think. And certainly it was a fortunate an act of fortune, really, that Harry and Meghan were actually in town, because they were on a mini European tour of their own, sort of royal tour light, if you will, the life that they chose to leave behind. They'd been in the UK, they'd been in Manchester at the One Youth World Conference. Then they'd gone over to Dusseldorf for the Invictus Games, and then they were due to attend the World Child Award on Thursday, just after the Queen had been taken ill, and obviously they're still here. So it's a bizarre scene, because Harry and Meghan's home, their UK home, is Royal Cottage. I've heard a lot about that, about the fact that they hadn't paid for it, and taxpayers had foot the bill until they stumped up the cash. And William and Kate and the children have moved to a place called Adelaide Cottage, which is on the Windsor estate. So they're literally living less than a mile from each other and haven't spoken. I mean, there's the rift between them is well documented, and it certainly hasn't thawed at all, because Meghan and Harry have not only taken part in the Oprah Winfrey interview that is still being discussed to this day. There's been several other interviews with American broadcasters from Harry, and then Meghan's podcast that she's pumping out every Tuesday at the moment, and using that as an opportunity to again rail against the royal family and her time as a senior royal. So the relationship couldn't be more fractured. But the Prince of Wales definitely thought that this was an opportunity to, I suppose, nip it in the bud, because there would have been huge speculation as to when the brothers would have got together, leading right up into the funeral. So the fact they were both in Windsor, William had come back from Balmoral after racing up there in the hours that the Queen was gravely ill. Kate had obviously stayed in Windsor because the children had started their first day at school on Thursday, the day the Queen died. So again, I mean, they're fully aware that these pictures of the four of them walking side by side, you know, the former Fab Four as they were once known, and lauded that could have been the future of the monarchy before it went all pear-shaped. I suppose that they understand that, and I definitely think that that's part of the process. They've got to get ahead of the story almost, but this truce will be very, very short-lived. There's still an awful lot of nervousness in the camp surrounding Harry and Meghan. I mean, they're supposed to be being documented for a Netflix series. We still don't know the sort of that content of that, but on several events we've seen Harry and Meghan with camera crews. There was a lot of controversy with Meghan going to Uvalde after the massacre in the States with the camera crew. And Harry's got a big memoir coming out, and so if that is scheduled for this year, and it was set to be as explosive as one could imagine on the back of their Oprah interviews and so forth, then there is definitely more than a sense of distrust in this family, and you can understand why.
Yeah. Now, ask us your questions, everybody. We do tend to get some very odd comments sometimes about Harry and Meghan when we discuss them, but try and keep them decent and respectful this morning, please, and we'll try our best to answer them for you. Now, the few times that I've ever come across William Russell in private situations, he's really super cagey about anybody he doesn't trust and doesn't know personally. He just won't say anything at all, and he's been like that his entire life. So when he's got his brother writing a memoir, he's got his sister-in-law producing a weekly podcast, and they've got a Netflix documentary as well. He will just want to clam up because he is so concerned about people telling the public things he doesn't necessarily want the public to hear, or just anything sometimes. But, you know, if you were the publisher for Harry's memoir right now, you're putting pause on it and going, Harry, if you want your whatever it is, several $100,000 for this, I want a chapter on the Queen's funeral tacked on at the end, please. If you're producing the podcast, if you're Spotify, you're saying you're going to do one about the funeral, aren't you, to Meghan? So, you know, this is how they make their money now. This is how they survive. It's how they pay their extortionate living costs that they have as royals and celebrities. So they're going to have this pull, Harry and Meghan, to be fair to them. If they want to be nice to the royals and not say anything about what's going on behind the scenes, they're going to be financially compelled to, aren't they? And I think
you're totally right. The issue here for them is when they announced they were leaving to seek their, in quotes, financial independence, I think alarm bells started ringing, because, you know, Harry was a rich man in his own right. He'd been given a large sum of money from the Queen Mother. His mother's estate also left him quite a lot of money. I mean, in the tune of 20-30 million pounds, it always been reported. Meghan had a successful TV acting career. So how much money do you need? I mean, they definitely spoke about.
They've got the lifestyle of billionaires, haven't they?
Well, of course, yeah, and that's what they've moved to. They've moved to next door with Oprah and people like Ellen DeGeneres into Montecito. I mean, you can't just go and buy a $14 million mansion and then not have money to pay the bills. So the fact that, I mean, they were two big megastars as soon as they left. They were super in demand. That's why they were able to sign huge contracts with Netflix, with Spotify, and into the tune. We're talking $100 million for the two. So, but the problem with that is then you almost are a slave to them, because they will want the content, and when you're involved in something like a bitter dispute, like a falling out, then that is the content that they will want. And then if that is the only trope that you have, it becomes a problem, and certainly in such a closely guarded private event such as this, or even though it is being outplayed on the world stage, they are going to want the granular detail, and I'm sure that's made a lot of the family nervous. And I thought very, very telling, in fact, that not only Harry travelled alone up to Balmoral on the day that the Queen was gravely ill, but he also left around 12 hours later, a little over 12 hours later. And so you must wonder what the reaction for the of the family was like when he arrived, because again, these deeply distressing personal moments for the rest of the family, and then they've got to couple that with a deep sense of nervousness and distrust of someone who used to be much loved. But
exactly. And it's that detail of what happened when you meet someone again that people want to hear on the podcast and everything else. Now, Dee asked about where you can get a podcast link. I don't know who's you're asking about, Dee. I presume it's mine, not Megan's. If you want to listen to our podcast, there are some links in the comments. You can find us on Spotify and Apple iTunes. I think Megan is just on Spotify because she's not as popular as us.
Yes.
Well, they also pay her more. So you can find them there. But I feel that we're almost inevitably going to get information coming out about this, and it's going to come from the US end of the family. And if not from the journalists, then from their own podcasts and their own memoirs and their own things. And also, those pictures won't have done their bankability any harm, will it? For Harry and Meghan to still be walking out with the royals is what makes them earn their money. That's how they live.
Well, again, when they were doing podcasts, when they were doing interviews, I think that everyone thought, well, this will be the real truth. It'll be them being authentic, telling. I hate that phrase. I mean, Oprah Winfrey used it about your truth. I mean, that is just such a paradox, because surely there is only one truth of the matter. There may be two sides of the story, but your truth doesn't really fit well. And the issue is that the bar is being raised every time. So whenever Meghan, the Oprah Winfrey interview was absolutely explosive. She said that was racism within the royal family. She'd felt suicidal when pregnant, that they basically were forced out because they were upsetting the hierarchy. Well, we've heard all this, and yet we're hearing it time and time and time again on different platforms. So whether it is an interview with ABC, whether it's to publicise the Invictus Games, or this podcast that, in fairness, is doing tremendously well. I mean, I think it's still number one in over a dozen countries. So they must be doing something right. But I think the issue that they have is, if Harry wants to have any relationship with his brother, then they're going about it certainly the wrong way. And again, the people I was speaking to yesterday were saying that don't be fooled by the reactions of the crowd or the actual pictures that were being painted, because this is a temporary truce. It is definitely a coming together of the brothers on behalf of the Prince of Wales, I suppose, because William made the decision to reach out to Harry in that way, because he viewed it as though it was what his grandmother would want. And I think we'll get to the funeral, then Harry and Meghan will leave again, and I think it will be back to square one, because not only will William have an awful lot of business to attend to there, he will not have time to deal with Harry and Meghan's noise, I'm afraid.
No, exactly. And there is probably going to be some further division between them as well, not least because that's the way these things work. Now, William, as you've said there, is now Prince of Wales, right? It's this odd thing for us to get our heads around. But, if Harry and Meghan meet him, they have to bow or curtsy, whatever now. He takes precedence. And on pages 14, 15, Russell, you talk about how he's not only Prince of Wales, heir to the throne, but he's also being chosen to carry on his father's charity work, modernise the monarchy to the extent that that's even possible, while Harry's very much left on his own to carry on doing his thing, whatever that is. Is that wise? Does it not make perhaps some sense for some of Charles's patronages to go to Harry to kind of give him something else to do that isn't quite so damaging, maybe?
Well, the issue is, first and foremost, Harry decided to leave, and not only just leave and out through the side door. I mean, they dropped a bomb and have left an absolute cascade of issues after leaving. So I really I sympathise with William and Charles, because Charles had always said that William and Harry, and indeed their wives, would be at the centre of a slimmed down monarchy. They were very, very keen for Meghan to work with Harry on these patronages. And I think you look back at a period where there was so much excitement, joy. People really did wonder what Meghan could bring to the royal family. A mixed race woman, a woman who was very, very eloquent, had a successful career outside of sort of royal life, and could bring a completely different perspective. However, it didn't work out like that, did it? So the issue that they have is, even if they wanted to share the burden, and I imagine that they would do, because there's an awful lot. You've got only the Queen's patronages, over 600. The Duke of Edinburgh no longer here. And now Charles has already said in his first address to the nation that he won't be able to even give the attention to his charities now that he is king. So there's an awful lot riding on William and Kate's shoulders, and unfortunately, the sort of the cast that they have at their disposal is so thin that they're going to be absolutely flat out, I would say. But no, I think the damage is done with the Sussexes' relationship, and there won't be any way back for them, because again, there's just such a level of distrust and dissatisfaction about what they've done.
Yeah. Now, Leslie says, surely modernising the family means a change in attitudes towards each other. I think, Leslie, that's only if you argue that their attitude and distrust towards each other is to do with traditions in the past. I think we've lots of modern families, and we've all got problems with in-laws. One way or the other. And I think if you've got a problem with your husband's family, you're probably on Meghan's side. And if you've got a problem with your daughter-in-law, then you're probably on the royal side. And Rita says, people have too much to say. I love Harry and William. I really hope they sort things out. It would be nice, Rita, but have any of us in our families managed to fix our estrangements? Probably not. Even at funerals, there's still a little bit of daggers drawn, isn't there? Sabine says, would they even want to come back? I doubt it, Sabine. I think that's probably a big part of it. And speaking of other princes, this isn't the only thing, of course, that's happening this week. We've also got Andrew is walking behind the Queen's coffin today down Royal Mile with the rest of his family, the rest of the Queen's children. And the public seems to have parked some of the public's concerns about Prince Andrew. No one's shouting abuse at him. So everyone's just sort of letting the funeral go past, it would seem. Now, across the first 6 pages of the paper, we've got scenes and interviews from along the Queen's route yesterday, including Ballater, possibly the least Republican village in Scotland, where locals are considered the royals their neighbours, basically. And today, Charles, as we said, he undertakes this Operation Spring Tides, a journey across Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, to accept the fealty of nations which are not always terribly keen on the monarchy and have some very strong sort of independence movements within them. Russell, what's your reading of this? It's a very sort of rapid consolidation of the union in a way, isn't it? It's the sort of thing that goes back centuries when kings had to consolidate their power, perhaps violently, to keep hold of the crown in the immediate days after a succession. Is it going to work in this instance?
Well, they don't really get an opportunity to say no at this moment. It's such a whistle-stop tour. I think that they feel compelled to just go along with the theatre of it all. You're right. I mean, in centuries gone by, they would have been a sort of could have been a bloody massacre at the door if they hadn't said yes, welcome, King. But the language has obviously changed these days. It is to go to receive messages of condolence. Obviously, there will be proclamations in these the 4 nations, as there has been in England already on Saturday after the Accession Council. So again, it's all steeped in history. I think it's absolutely fascinating to watch what is happening. But gosh, it is an absolute whistle-stop tour. I mean, you've got Charles will return to Scotland today after being in Westminster Hall. He will be meeting councillors and talking again to Privy Councils, getting ready to do this the tour of the nations back to Scotland, when there will be obviously the procession later. He will be leading that procession to take his mother's coffin from the Palace of Holyrood House down to St Giles Cathedral. And not only that, I mean, I think that the crowds were pretty impressive in Edinburgh yesterday. Hushed silence as the Queen was brought back to lay and rest at Holyrood House, and then later the public will be given their first opportunity to visit Her Majesty's coffin.
Yeah.
Then obviously Charles on Tuesday is going to Belfast in the morning. He's then back to England, and then we have a huge procession on Wednesday of the Queen coming from her, leaving Buckingham Palace for the very last time to then lie in state for 4 days at Westminster Hall, and the crowds are going to be absolutely phenomenal. I was speaking to one of the senior organisers there yesterday, saying that they're expecting 1 million people over those 4 days. I mean, and that might even be a conservative estimate, because there's going to be 2 million people in the capital each day, and you get the sense of it's really ramping up now with the world leaders coming, with Charles's tour, the fact that the Queen is coming back to England and back to Buckingham Palace for the last time.
Answer me a question, Russell, because I don't understand this. How do they work out how many people they can expect at a thing no one's ever been to before or has precedence for? Because are they taking, is there an equation like where they take the number of tourists that are usually in London at a certain time of year and then adding that to a certain extrapolation of the size of the crowds outside Buckingham Palace when the news came through, and then creating an equation to say, well, we're expecting this many? Or is it the fact that when they organise one of these things, the fact that it's organised means millions of people come?
Well, it's a bit of both. So I'll give you sort of my interpretation of it. And after speaking to not only the organisers who are in charge of London Operation London Bridge, but also the security element as well, which is in today's world totally different to anything that will have happened before. And I think the sort of blueprint that they look at is William Churchill's funeral, Winston Churchill rather, his funeral, which was the last major state funeral in this country of where you would have seen crowds that they are expecting. Again, that they will couple that with the fact that people have now got to go through airport scanners. They can't necessarily bring big bags. They've got to be able to go to certain points to get into palaces and Green Park, and people filtering in at all these separate points within the city. So it's a bit of both. And that one of the points they're using is when the Olympics in the Olympic Park was absolutely rammed, that will absolutely pale into significance. And then they just, I imagine, multiply it by a certain figure, work out the sort of time that it takes to get from point A to B, point to search your bag, walk around to view the coffin at Westminster Hall. However, I mean, when the senior police officers that met yesterday were saying that this is such a complex operation, they've almost got to really be very, very adaptable, because the briefing notes that I'd seen, a couple of years ago when they were talking about London Bridge, because obviously these plans have been long held, even though they are very, very fluid when it actually happens. They were talking about London potentially grinding to a halt, so that you get so many people within the capital, you wouldn't be able to get on the tubes, transport would grind to a halt, the streets would be packed. So they are obviously planning for every eventuality, and I imagine that the crowds will be absolutely phenomenal as the Queen is on her final journey, essentially.
Exactly. Now, Paola says from all around the world, people are going to watch the funeral of this great Queen. It does sound like watching on the telly might be better than being there in person. I imagine some of what their estimates are coming out of might include the funeral of Princess Diana, which was also pretty big, wasn't it? And fairly had a lot of people there. So Westminster in this week, there's all the queues that are going to be planned, expected rather. They are warning, if anyone is thinking of going, not to take small children, because you could be standing up for a very long time and in a queue for a very long time. And bear in mind, it's September, it can rain. So she'll be at Westminster Hall from Wednesday at 5 o'clock, although I think the people on the parliamentary estate get to go in there first. And then it's sort of public viewings really from Thursday to Sunday, I think, isn't it, Russell? And then the funeral next Monday.
Well, right up until Monday morning, you'll be able to. They're talking about they might have to shut the line off at a certain stage, but the Queen won't leave Westminster Hall until 6:30 of the morning of the funeral, and then the funeral is at starting at 11 o'clock on Monday, September the 19th. So there's an awful lot happening. I mean, again, there's so many moving parts in this, because you not only got the Queen sort of doing final journey from Palace of Holyrood House, St Giles, and coming back to England and then back to London with Princess Anne. You've also got Charles's tour. Well, obviously, I imagine hear from Harry and Meghan. We'll obviously look to see what the new Prince and Princess of Wales is doing, and then you've got all the world leaders descending on the UK as well. I mean, I thought it was quite funny yesterday that the Cabinet Office were putting briefing notes out saying that they specifically asked the world leaders, heads of the Commonwealth, and senior politicians who are obviously going to want to be here and pay their last respects, to fly commercial, to not bring any state cars. I mean, you know, like when Biden turns up with the Beast and he flies with about 400 security agents.
Three jets. How's he going to? He's not going to fly.
No, precisely. I don't know what they're expecting of him, but they said that everybody will be put on buses and bussed around from place to place. So,
can Joe Biden get on a bus?
I'm not too sure, but I'm sure he's not going to be too happy about it either way.
No, I can imagine some of the more minor world leaders would go, all right, we're going to park in wherever. We'll park at Stratford and get on a bus. But I can't see Joe Biden flying economy and then clambering up on the front deck of a But well done for trying. Maybe they'll give him one of those disabled access ones so the floor comes down. Anyway, let's show some respect. Thank you, Russell, for taking us through that. Now there is some good news in the world out of all of this, and we managed to find some that's courtesy of the Queen. Here it is. Now, on pages 16 and 17, there are some recollections of some of the Queen's more light-hearted moments, shall we say, some of her more pithy comments. One really stands out today. So as we've got the news that the Ukrainians are pushing back Putin in their war, down in the bottom left corner, the former Home Secretary David Blunkett reveals that when in 2003, like 19 years ago, when Vladimir Putin was carrying out a state visit, Blunkett's guide dog Sadie couldn't stop barking at him. And Blunkett had to apologise to the Queen for the interruptions. And she remarked very dryly, well, dogs have very interesting instincts, don't they? So, Russell, is this, I don't know if it's appropriate to do an impression this early on, but, you know, it's been 4 days. Russell, is this proof that the Queen, and perhaps politicians' dogs, knew rather more about people than most of us do? I mean, she seems to have known 20 years ago that there was something amiss with Putin.
Well, I thought it was quite hilarious, actually, and I definitely sympathise with the broadcasters who have such acres and acres of coverage to fill on a huge story like this. But it was one of the BBC commentators said, and of course the Queen's corgis will know nothing of her passing. And I thought, well, that's probably not quite right, because the dogs are so astute normally that they normally pick up things far quicker than humans.
And the bees have been told. So I mean, the thought that the corgis haven't got the memo.
Bees, I love that story about the bees, that the man made this sort of solemn journey down to the hive to tell all the bees that
absolutely standard beekeeping practice. You tell them about family events, otherwise they get a bit upset and go away. So you know, it's very important that, and telling the bees and telling the corgis, some of whom unfortunately have got to go and live.
I'm just looking at some breaking news, because we've got a statement from Prince Harry.
All right.
That I imagine they were working on yesterday, but it was 9/11, so I imagine that didn't happen. I'll just read you a little bit of it. It says, "In celebrating the life of my grandmother, Her Majesty the Queen, and in mourning her loss, we are reminded of the guiding compass who was so many in her commitment to service and duty. She was globally admired and respected. Her unwavering grace and dignity remained true throughout her life, and now her everlasting legacy." I mean, he calls her Granny. "Granny, while this final parting brings us great sadness, I am forever grateful for all those meetings, from my earliest childhood memories with you, to meeting you for the first time as Commander-in-Chief, to the first moment you met my darling wife and hugged your beloved great-grandchildren. I cherish these times shared with you and the many other special moments in between. You are sorely missed, not just by us, but the world over. And it comes to first meetings, we now honour my father in his new role as King Charles III." Just close it, actually, saying, "Thank you for your commitment to service. Thank you for your sound advice. Thank you for your infectious smile. We too smile, know that you and Grandpa are united now and both together in peace." So I'm sure a lot will be made of Harry's statement. Of course, he was still very, very close to his grandmother, and the Queen uttered those words that they were still much loved members of the family, despite the fact that they've been railing against them for so long. So,
well, everyone's got a grandmother, haven't they? And we can all have some sympathy for that, I should think. Although it's perhaps a bit of a pity that she didn't get to see more of Lilibet and Archie before she left. Anyway, thank you, Russell, for that, and reacting so quickly to the news. Crikey, it's almost like you're a trained journalist. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. We will see you all again on Wednesday for another edition of the News Agenda, which I suspect is going to be about the Queen. Probably. So do tune in, and we'll see you all then. Bye-bye.
Thank you.